One heartbeat, and everything changes. An ordinary family, a cozy home, familiar faces. But behind the glass, cracks are forming, as if someone is slowly, with terrifying precision, building a trap, quietly, coldly, without haste. He trusted. She smiled. And then, a glance, a pause, doubt. And now it no longer matters whether it's real or just a trick of the mind, because there's no way back. Everything hidden eventually surfaces, and the one who thought they were the victim might turn out to be the hunter, or something far worse. Only one question remains: who will make the final move, and what will it cost? Hello, my friend. I'm so glad you stopped by my channel. If you're here for the first time, don't forget to subscribe and share this video with your friends or family. It really helps my channel a lot. Please tell me in which city or country you watched this video. I value every one of your comments. So, let's get started. Julian lay still, utterly unmoving, not the slightest twitch, not even the faintest breath. Elliot dropped to his knees in the coarse sand, his heart pounding so hard it hurt, his fingers trembling as he tilted Julian's chin upward and pressed his mouth against the boy's. He inhaled sharply, breathed into him. Nothing. Grinding his teeth, Elliot fought the rising panic clawing at his chest. His own lungs burned for air. "Don't you dare die on me," he muttered under his breath, his voice raw with anger and desperation. Breathe, damn it. Every part of him wanted to scream, to turn away and abandon this nightmare, but he stayed rooted where he was. He couldn't leave. He had to keep trying, for Julian's sake, for his son's sake. Julian, who was more than just Asher's best friend. Julian, who had been at the center of the betrayal that shattered Elliot's life. Reason had always been Elliot's compass, his protection. A man of figures and logic, steady and detached. Now, at 57, he had built his world on order, a flourishing career in finance, a meticulously curated home, a life governed by precision. Valerie had been the wild card he hadn't expected, lively, magnetic, a woman who captured attention effortlessly. She was a hurricane, unafraid of anything, brushing off resistance with a laugh. Once, her fire had been what drew him in. Now, that same flame might be the very thing that had set his life ablaze. Elliot bolted upright in bed, sweat cooling on his skin. The darkness felt oppressive, wrong. Instinctively, he reached out, searching for her beside him. His hand met nothing but cool, empty sheets. A glance at the clock revealed it was well past midnight. The house stood silent, except for the low hum of the AC. He pulled on a t-shirt and headed downstairs, feet making almost no sound. Maybe Valerie was watching a late-night movie. Maybe she was struggling to sleep again. Halfway down the hall, a sound stopped him cold, a voice from the kitchen, low and flirtatious. He stiffened, muscles locking. Valerie's voice, soft, teasing, almost purring. That was amazing. I need more. Shock and fury coursed through Elliot like lightning. "You're so hot," he heard her say, each word cutting deeper than the last. He stepped into the kitchen doorway. His voice was a blade. "Who are you talking to?" Valerie jumped, spinning to face him, her phone still pressed to her ear. For a fraction of a second, her face twisted, guilt, fear, then smoothed into practiced calm. With a quick tap, she ended the call, letting out a long, irritated sigh, as if he were the one out of line. "You scared the life out of me," she said, one hand planted on her hip. "Who was that?" Elliot asked, his voice tight. "Aubrey," she said easily, as if she had rehearsed it. "We were just laughing about a movie we saw earlier." "Relax." Elliot watched her, feeling like the ground was tilting beneath his feet. "You said, you're hot." Valerie's mouth curled into a smirk. She tossed her head back and let out a short, brittle laugh. "God, Elliot. Babe, you've been half-deaf for months now. Are you really sure you heard that right?" The accusation struck harder than he wanted to admit. Doubt crept in. Had he misheard? Valerie's tone sharpened, slicing through the kitchen's stillness. I don't need you lurking around like some insecure kid. These ridiculous accusations? Really? She poked him lightly in the chest, her smile tight and mocking. Maybe it's time you actually booked that hearing test, honey. You're slipping. With a disdainful sniff, she brushed past him, leaving only the lingering scent of her perfume behind. Elliot stood frozen, hollowed out. Maybe she was right. Her outrage had felt so genuine, so unshakable, and he couldn't deny it. His hearing had been getting worse lately, even if he hated admitting it. The next morning, Elliot sat at the kitchen table, flipping through the phone bill, telling himself it was just a routine check, just being thorough, until something stopped him cold. A single number, called 50 times in 1 month. 50 times. He stared at it, mind racing, heart sinking. Asher stumbled into the kitchen, yawning and rubbing his eyes. "Hey," Elliot said, trying to sound casual. "You recognize this number?" He turned the screen toward his son. Asher squinted, leaned closer, then frowned. "Yeah," he said. "That's Julian's." A chill spread through Elliot's chest. Julian, Asher's best friend. But, Asher added, still half asleep, I haven't called him that much. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Valerie. Valerie had made those calls, 50 calls, to Julian. Why? Later that morning, Valerie returned from her usual run, cheeks flushed, breath coming fast. Elliot had already rehearsed his words a dozen different ways. Valerie barely glanced at him, grabbing a water bottle from the fridge and stretching out her legs. "Good run?" Elliot asked, voice light, too light. She mumbled something between gulps. Elliot exhaled slowly, steadying himself. "Hey." Earlier that morning, Elliot had been combing through the phone bill. Valerie barely looked up, her expression bored. "Well?" she said flatly. "You made 50 calls to Julian last month," Elliot murmured, his tone heavy. Valerie froze, lowering the bottle she was holding. A frown creased her brow. 50? Are you serious? Elliot nodded, emphasizing it again. "Maybe you were trying to reach him for something important?" he ventured. Valerie let out a harsh, bitter laugh and shook her head. "Come on, Elliot. Julian's been asking me for advice. About college, about life after high school. He's overwhelmed and I'm doing my job. I'm his counselor. You really think I'd risk everything I've built? Over a kid?" she snapped. "I told you. He sought me out." Elliot hesitated. Had she mentioned that before? He wasn't sure anymore. "I just thought," he began, but Valerie immediately cut him off. "God, Elliot." "This again?" she said, tossing the empty bottle into the sink where it clattered loudly. "You digging through my phone records now?" she demanded, eyes flashing. "What's next, Elliot? Gonna track my car too?" she challenged. "That's not what I'm saying," Elliot muttered defensively. "Sounds a lot like you're calling me a liar. Again," she spat back, her voice sharp enough to wound. "This is about your hearing, Elliot. You can't admit how bad it's gotten." She paused, then added, almost as an afterthought. But the words had already escaped. "And that's not even the whole problem, is it?" Elliot felt a chill settle deep inside him. "Go ahead," he said quietly. "Say it." Valerie crossed her arms, breathing heavily, her face set in stone. "You're slipping," she said, "just like your father did." The accusation landed like a physical blow. His father, who had lived out his final years locked away, haunted by things no one else could see. Elliot stared blankly at the table, his throat tight. Maybe she was right. Later that afternoon, Asher had invited Julian over to help fix up his bike in the garage. The two boys spent hours working, their hands coated in grease and grime. After a while, Asher stood up, stretching with a groan. "Gonna hit the shower, dude," he said, rolling his shoulders. Julian nodded, wiping his palms on a rag. "Cool," he said. Not long after, Elliot returned home from work. The moment he stepped inside, He knew something was off. The house felt unnaturally silent. No television chatter, no music pulsing from Asher's room. Just a hollow, heavy quiet. Elliot glanced outside. Valerie's car was still there, and so was Julian's. His heart started pounding as he climbed the stairs. He could hear the shower running faintly from down the hall. "Asher? Valerie?" he called out. No answer. The lights in the hallway flickered, stretching strange shadows along the walls. An uneasy feeling tightened in his chest as he neared Asher's door. He pushed it open and froze where he stood. Valerie and Julian were seated on the bed, much too close together. They were leaning toward each other, their knees nearly touching. Valerie's legs were tucked beneath her, Julian's knee just inches from hers. Both looked flustered, cheeks flushed, hair tousled, breathing a little too fast. For one suspended moment, none of them moved. Valerie was the first to react, her head snapping toward Elliot, her eyes wide before narrowing sharply. "Jesus, Elliot!" she blurted out, her voice high and strained. Elliot clenched his fists unconsciously. "Hey, Julian," he said, his voice carefully measured. "Everything all right? Where's Asher?" Valerie gave a brittle, unnatural laugh. "We were just talking," she said, too quickly. "Asher's in the shower." Julian wouldn't meet Elliot's eyes. His ears were turning an unmistakable shade of pink. Elliot's gut twisted. Every instinct screamed that something wasn't right. Valerie rose to her feet, smoothing her shirt as if to erase the tension hanging thick in the room. "You seriously need to deal with your paranoia," she said icily. "Maybe you should see someone about it." Without another glance, she brushed past him, striding down the hall. Julian followed, his gaze fixed firmly on the floor. Elliot didn't want to believe it. He couldn't believe it. But something about what he had seen, something about the air between them, felt wrong, deeply, horribly wrong. That night, desperate to fix what he could, Elliot made a decision. "I rented a cabin at the lake," he told Valerie as they got ready for bed. "Just for the family. A weekend getaway." Valerie exhaled, the anger from earlier already seeming distant. She reached out and squeezed his arm. "That sounds amazing," she said warmly. It was the least he could do, after everything he had put her through. The next morning, the car was packed and the engine was humming, ready for the drive. Elliot was about to climb behind the wheel when he heard footsteps crunching on the gravel behind him. Turning, he saw Julian approaching, backpack slung over one shoulder, looking slightly awkward, but not awkward enough, standing right next to Valerie. Elliot stared at him, stunned, completely blindsided. "Elliot?" Julian's voice cut sharply through the stillness, catching Elliot completely off guard. "What are you doing here?" Flashing a wide, almost mischievous grin, Julian said, "Mrs. Carter invited me along." Elliot immediately shot a glance at Valerie, who had the nerve to behave like this was all perfectly normal, as if she hadn't kept it from him until the last possible moment, right before they left. Taking a slow, deliberate breath through his nose, Elliot fought to keep his reaction under control. "Valerie," he said, his voice tight with tension. "A word. Now." Valerie tossed Julian a quick, soothing smile. "Go ahead and hop in the car, honey. We'll be right there." As soon as the door clicked shut behind Julian, Elliot seized her gently but firmly by the arm and pulled her a few steps away. "Would you like to explain this?" he hissed, keeping his voice low, though his anger vibrated just beneath the surface. Valerie exhaled heavily, as if already exhausted. "Elliot, don't start. Don't you dare Elliot me," he snapped back. "When exactly were you planning to let me know this weekend became a group outing?" Valerie folded her arms across her chest, her face unreadable. "I told you before. His family couldn't afford something like this. I thought it would be a generous thing to do." "And when did you decide that?" He pushed. Tilting her head ever so slightly, Valerie replied, "Does it really make a difference?" "It does," Elliot said quietly, his eyes locking onto hers. It matters because you knew I wouldn't agree. And you went ahead anyway. His fists clenched at his sides, nails digging into his palms. Deep down, he could already feel it. This weekend was going to be anything but restful. Grinding his teeth, he forced himself to breathe past the anger boiling up inside. Fine, he finally said, the word like a shard of glass in his throat. But something inside him shifted, uneasy and dark, something he couldn't shake. The lake sprawled out before them, its surface smooth and shining like a mirror, the picture of tranquility. But Elliot's mind buzzed with growing dread. He didn't want to believe it. He really didn't. Still, the hints were there, quiet but persistent. The way Valerie's laughter turned soft and secretive whenever Julian was nearby. How Julian always seemed to linger just a little too close. The heavy silences that dropped whenever Elliot entered a room. Maybe he was imagining things. Maybe it was all in his head. Later, rifling through the suitcase in search of his phone charger, Elliot's hand brushed against something unexpected. He pulled it free and froze. It was a bikini. But not just any bikini. Tiny, flimsy, with barely enough material to cover anything. The sort of thing Valerie hadn't worn in years, certainly not on a so-called family trip. Heart-hammering, Elliot stormed out of the cabin, the scandalous swimsuit balled in his fist. He didn't bother holding back anymore. "What the hell is this supposed to be?" he barked, slamming the minuscule bikini down on the battered wooden table in front of her. Valerie blinked, momentarily caught off guard. Then her face hardened. "It's a bathing suit," she said coolly. "No kidding," Elliot retorted. "Why are you bringing this to a cabin in the middle of nowhere?" Valerie's eyes narrowed, flashing with anger. "Are you seriously accusing me right now?" "Dead serious," Elliot said, his voice sharp as a blade. "What am I supposed to think? The way you act around Julian, the secret smiles, the constant whispering. And now this?" Valerie shot up from her seat, fury blazing in her expression, the firelight throwing shadows across her face. "You are unbelievable, Elliot," she spat, her voice quivering with rage. "You know that? Absolutely unbelievable." She threw her arms up, exasperated. "I bought that stupid bikini for you, Elliot, so maybe, just maybe, you'd remember I exist." Elliot stood frozen, his chest rising and falling rapidly, staring at her like he'd never seen her before. "This isn't about Julian," she seethed. "It's about you, your endless paranoia, your obsession with digging up betrayals that don't exist, twisting everything into something ugly." Her hands trembled as she raked them through her hair, looking at him like he was a puzzle she was too exhausted to solve. "You see ghosts where there are none. And now what? Now I'm guilty of packing the wrong swimsuit?" She shook her head tightly, her mouth a hard, unforgiving line. "You know what? Maybe you should take one of your famous walks, Elliot. Go cool off. Think about how you're wrecking everything." Without waiting for a response, she brushed past him, her shoulder knocking against his. Elliot stayed rooted in place, his breathing ragged and uneven. Outside, near the old woodshed, the buzz of the saw filled the evening air as Asher steadily worked through a thick log. Despite the coolness of the breeze, sweat soaked his shirt, plastering it to his back. He barely glanced up when Julian ambled over, hands buried casually in his pockets, a smug look on his face. "Trouble at home?" Julian asked, nodding toward the cabin, pretending innocence. They were loud enough to hear out here. Asher sighed, setting the saw down with a clatter. "It's nothing new," he said simply. Julian chuckled under his breath and pulled out his phone. "Yeah, well, maybe it's not nothing." At that, Asher's brow creased. "What are you talking about?" Julian's grin widened as he tapped at his screen. "Here," he said, flipping the device toward Asher. The video played. There, caught in grainy footage, was Valerie, laughing in a dim room, her face lit up in a way Asher hadn't seen in a long time. Her speech was slightly blurred, each word slipping out unevenly. Behind her, Julian's voice rang out, sharp and mocking. "Come on, Mrs. Carter, show us what you've got." And she did. Asher felt his chest constrict painfully as he stared, watching her hips sway as she slid the dress from her shoulders, exposing smooth, bare skin underneath. The low, throbbing beat of the music wrapped around them like a heavy fog. She twirled, threading her fingers through her hair, her teeth grazing her bottom lip as she danced slowly, seductively, oblivious to the phone camera capturing it all. Asher's vision blurred, a surge of heat rushing to his cheeks, while nausea twisted brutally in his gut. His hands clenched into fists. "What the—" His voice broke apart, rough with disbelief. "What the hell is this?" Julian only laughed, clearly relishing Asher's stunned reaction. "Relax," Julian sneered. "Everyone at school's already seen it." The ground seemed to pitch under Asher's feet. A piercing, high-pitched whine filled his ears, drowning out the world. Before he could think, he lunged, his fist smashing into Julian's jaw. Julian stumbled backward, dropping his phone to the sand where it cracked against the earth. But Asher wasn't finished, not even close. Out on the lake, Elliot sat in his small boat, clutching his fishing rod, his heart still pounding from the earlier clash with Valerie. The steady slap of water against the hull should have calmed him, but his mind churned with restless, furious thoughts. He needed the solitude. He needed time to think. Suddenly, shouting shattered the stillness. His head jerked up. On the distant shore, two figures grappled violently, fists flying, Asher and Julian. A shard of fear stabbed through Elliot. Julian swung recklessly, but Asher tackled him with crushing force, driving them both into the sand. They rolled, locked in a brutal struggle, inching closer and closer to the water's edge until, with a loud splash, both bodies disappeared beneath the surface. Elliot's blood ran cold. Julian thrashed, desperate to escape, but Asher held him under, shoving him deeper and deeper. No. In that split second, Elliot understood. His son was trying to drown Julian. Horror seized him. He tossed his fishing rod aside, seized the oars, and rowed furiously toward shore. Each frantic stroke set his muscles screaming, the boat knifing through the water. On the beach, Julian's resistance weakened. Asher stayed atop him, fury etched into every line of his face. Elliot hit the sand running, plunging into the freezing water without a second's hesitation. He yanked Asher away from Julian, flinging him backward with a strength fueled by pure terror. Julian floated, lifeless, his skin deathly pale and his lips an awful shade of blue. Without thinking, Elliot dragged Julian onto dry land, tilted his head back, and began mouth to mouth. Compressions. Breathe. Still nothing. Again. Breathe. Finally, a violent shudder racked Julian's body. He sputtered, choking up lake water, gasping desperately for air. A crowd had gathered by then, the dock rumbling under their pounding footsteps, voices crying out in panic. Someone screamed that the police had been called. Breathless, his hands shaking uncontrollably, Elliot turned on Asher. Fury and fear twisted his face. "Have you completely lost your mind?" he roared. "What the hell were you thinking?" Asher didn't answer. He just stood there, chest heaving, his eyes burning with a chaotic rage Elliot couldn't even begin to understand. Then Valerie broke through the crowd, hair disheveled, eyes wide with terror, but she didn't rush to Asher. She dropped to the sand beside Julian instead, cupping his bruised face in trembling hands. "Oh my God, baby, are you okay?" Her voice fractured, thick with heartbreak. In that moment, Elliot's world spun off its axis. Baby. Not Asher. Julian. Asher turned to him then, his whole body vibrating with fury, fists still balled at his sides, and Elliot realized with a sick, gut-wrenching clarity, something massive, something devastating had been happening right under his nose. The drive afterward was a silent, suffocating ordeal. Elliot gripped the steering wheel in a death grip, his knuckles bone white, the truck humming steadily beneath them. His thoughts spiraled, dredging up every suspicious glance, every hushed conversation between Valerie and Julian that he had brushed aside. After the chaos, Valerie had taken Julian home. Hours had passed. No calls, no texts. Now, in the brutal clarity of hindsight, Elliot saw the truth he'd refused to confront. The secretive touches, the urgent, whispered exchanges, the blind loyalty she gave Julian. How she flaunted herself in that bikini. Oh, God! His wife and his son's best friend. Revulsion churned in his stomach, almost overwhelming him. By the time they reached the police station, Elliot's head throbbed miserably. He scribbled his name onto the release forms with a hand that felt disconnected from his body, barely hearing the officer's voice as Asher was let out. Asher's face was a mask of stone, his jaw locked tight, his eyes cold and unreadable. They didn't exchange a single word as they crossed the lot and climbed into the truck. They drove in oppressive silence, the distance between them thick and suffocating, until, at last, Elliot couldn't bear it any longer. He yanked the truck onto the gravel shoulder, the tires crunching loudly as he slammed it into park. Asher snapped his head toward him, eyes wide with alarm. "What?" Elliot turned sharply in his seat, his voice cutting like ice. "Why did you fight him?" Asher's mouth pressed into a hard, thin line, his stare fixed ahead through the windshield. Elliot exhaled slowly through his nose, his grip briefly tightening on the steering wheel before he forced himself to release it. His voice dropped into a rough whisper. "You know, don't you?" Asher didn't move. Not a blink, not a breath. Elliot pushed forward, his words tasting like ash. "You know about him and your mother." Asher's shoulders tensed violently, a shallow, broken gasp slipping out of him. The dam broke. Asher's body folded inward as a jagged sob escaped him, his hands covering his face while tremors racked him. Elliot sat there, feeling an emptiness tear open inside him. The truth was out now, ugly, raw, and irreversible. There was no undoing it. No pretending that Asher's world hadn't just been shattered beyond repair. His wife, his son's best friend. Elliot stared straight ahead into the shadowed road, his breathing slow but heavy. When he finally spoke again, his voice barely carried. "We're going home." Much later that night, Valerie crept through the front door, moving as if she could disappear into the darkness. The only light came from the kitchen, a faint, soft glow pushing back the deep shadows. Elliot sat at the table, a glass of whiskey half drained before him. He didn't look up. Valerie hovered in the entryway, uncertain. "You're still awake?" she asked. Elliot lazily swirled the whiskey in his glass, watching it catch the dim light. "Yeah." Valerie wrapped her arms around herself, shivering as if the chill had burrowed under her skin. "Is Asher asleep?" she asked, voice small. "Hours ago," Elliot answered, his tone flat and final. She lingered a moment longer, as if hoping he'd say more, but he simply lifted the glass to his lips and drank. Valerie sighed, exhaustion heavy in her voice. "I'm beat." Going to bed. Without waiting for a response, she disappeared down the hall. Elliot didn't move. He didn't call after her. He didn't ask anything. His mind was fixed on something else now, something inevitable. At dawn, while Valerie was still showering, Elliot slipped quietly into the garage. His actions were quick, precise, leaving no room for hesitation. A tiny recorder was carefully hidden beneath the dashboard of her car. Then came the cameras, one stashed in the garage, another hidden in the house. Small, invisible. All he had to do now was wait, and it didn't take long. Within days, the truth began to bleed through. Whispered conversations caught in the car, suppressed laughter, Julian's voice, low and aching. "I miss you," Julian said. Valerie's soft response came almost lovingly. "Just a little longer, baby." Elliot felt his insides twist, but he forced himself to keep listening. The cameras soon offered the final confirmation. Hour after hour of footage blurred past as Elliot sifted through it, relentless. Until finally, he found it. 1:15 a.m. Valerie creeping down the hall. 1:17, her knuckles rapping lightly on Julian's door. 1:20, the door easing open, welcoming her in. She didn't reappear until nearly 3 in the morning. Elliot stared blankly at the monitor, heart pounding, bile rising in his throat. He wasn't losing his grip. He wasn't imagining things. He had simply been blind. There was no rationalizing it now, no explaining it away, no lies left strong enough to smother what he had seen. She thought he would crumble. She thought he would break. She didn't know who she was dealing with. Elliot inhaled slowly, evenly. The real game was just beginning. Later that evening, Elliot sat slouched on the couch, the TV's dull flicker casting ghostly shadows across his face. His mind barely registered the images on the screen. It was elsewhere, working, calculating. He had everything he needed. Valerie appeared in the doorway, her expression different this time. Careful, almost wary, but not yet defensive. "We need to talk," she said, her voice quieter than usual. Elliot leaned back, studying her like a puzzle. "Go on." Valerie twisted her hands together nervously as she stepped closer, clearly hunting for the right words. "I didn't know how to tell you," she started, voice trembling slightly. Elliot's jaw tightened, but he kept his face blank. He'd heard this before, the half-truths, the manufactured sincerity. He stayed utterly still, just waiting. Valerie drew in a shaky breath and hesitated, then managed a tentative smile. "I found out today," she said in a near whisper. "I'm pregnant." Elliot blinked slowly, rocking back slightly as if absorbing a blow. "Yeah?" he said evenly. Valerie nodded eagerly, desperate for some reaction. "Maybe 3 weeks along," she offered with a nervous chuckle. "I know it's crazy, really early." She trailed off, hoping. Elliot let a slow, easy smile cross his face, tilting his head as if weighing her words. "That's big news," he said smoothly. Valerie's shoulders slackened, a fleeting sense of relief washing over her face. "Yeah," she breathed out. "It is." At that moment, she had no idea, no inkling that the man across from her already knew the truth, and had meticulously set everything into motion. A week later, the gym buzzed with chatter, clapping, and courteous laughter as parents mingled, celebrating the students' milestones. Elliot barely noticed the festivities. From across the gym, he caught sight of Valerie, radiant, chuckling at something a colleague had said, one hand unconsciously resting on her abdomen, as if she were still carrying his child, as if she were still his wife. She had no idea what was coming. Elliot pushed back his chair and rose. "I won't be long," he said, voice calm, almost casual. "But I have something I need to say." The room's noise dulled to a murmur. Faces began to turn toward him. Valerie's laugh faltered, freezing on her lips. Elliot let the hush linger, let the tension coil, before fixing his gaze directly on her. "We put our trust in the people who guide our children," he began, his voice even and clear. "We believe they have their best interests at heart. We count on them being people of honor." He paused, shaking his head slowly as he exhaled. "But sometimes, that trust gets shattered." Valerie shifted slightly in her seat, the tension visible in her jaw. The atmosphere in the gym shifted, turning uneasy. "My wife, Valerie Carter," Elliot went on, his voice steady, "is not just my partner at home. She's also the school's counselor, someone the students confided in, someone they looked to for support." He let his gaze sweep over the stunned audience, and she decided to betray all of that trust. Murmurs stirred in the crowd, uneasy and confused. Valerie gasped quietly, her face paling. "Elliot, stop," she whispered urgently. But he wasn't finished. She's been having an affair, Elliot said, his tone low but sharp, slicing through the silence. And not just any affair, with someone far younger, someone she should have stayed far away from. A wave of gasps rippled across the room. Julian's mother slowly rose to her feet, gripping the back of a folding chair so hard her knuckles turned stark white. Her face drained of color, then flushed an angry red. "You liar!" she snapped, her voice cutting through the gym like a blade. Every eye swung to her. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Valerie's eyes widened in horror. "Madeline," she whispered. But Madeline was already moving toward her, shaking with fury. "My son," she hissed. "My child? He trusted you. We all trusted you. You're a disgrace," she spat. Valerie bolted upright, her face stricken and pale. "I didn't. It's not what it looks like." "Don't even try," Madeline shot back, stepping closer until their faces were inches apart. The crowd instinctively pulled back, paralyzed between horror and fascination. And then, Madeline shoved her. It wasn't a brutal shove, but strong enough to send Valerie stumbling, her heels slipping on the polished gym floor. Valerie flailed, grabbing Madeline's shoulder for balance. For a heartbeat, it seemed Valerie only meant to steady herself, but she didn't. She pushed back, forcefully. The two women crashed together, arms flailing, hands clawing for hair and clothing. Folding chairs toppled over with loud clatters. A table tipped, papers fluttering into the air. Someone screamed. Madeline swung first, a savage, wide-arc slap that landed with a sickening crack against Valerie's cheek. Valerie reeled, then lunged, seizing the front of Madeline's blouse and yanking hard enough to pop buttons loose, scattering them across the floor like coins. They fell to the ground, rolling, throwing punches and clawing in a wild, frenzied struggle. Several parents rushed forward, shouting. A teacher tried to intervene, only to be knocked aside in the chaos. At last, a man managed to pull Madeline away while others pried Valerie off the floor. Both women were breathing hard, hair wild, faces flushed with rage. Blood dripped from the corner of Valerie's mouth. Madeline's earring was torn away, leaving a red gash where it had been ripped free. The gym stood frozen, locked in horrified silence. Julian remained rooted in place, face ghostly pale. Asher turned sharply away, his jaw tight with anger. And then, the sound of sirens. At first distant, then close. The gym doors burst open. Police officers stormed in, weapons secured but hands poised, shouting urgent commands. "Step back! Clear the area!" one barked. An officer strode directly toward Valerie. "Mrs. Carter?" Valerie turned to face him, dazed, battered, but her posture still defiant. "What the hell is happening?" she demanded, trying to tug her torn blouse into some semblance of order. "This is outrageous. You need to come with us," the officer said firmly. Held back by a teacher, Madeline pointed a shaking finger at Valerie. "Arrest her," she seethed. "She's not fit to be near any children." Valerie's voice cracked as she called out, "Elliot, please, please say something." But Elliot remained still, silent. His face gave nothing away. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and unyielding. "You should have walked away when you had the chance." And with that, the officers cuffed Valerie's wrists. Before the stunned, silent crowd, Valerie Carter was led away, her darkest secrets dragged ruthlessly into the open. Elliot ignored the first phone calls, then the second. Valerie kept reaching out, through her attorney, through Asher, even via mutual friends. Finally, a letter arrived. Short, desperate. "Please, just one meeting. That's all I'm asking. I need to speak with you." He agreed. And now, seated across from her in the bleak, sterile prison visiting area, he found himself feeling nothing. No fury, no sorrow, just a hollow void. Valerie clutched the phone on her side of the glass, her hands visibly shaking. "Thank you for coming, Elliot," she said softly. He offered no reply. He merely watched her in silence, unmoved, Tears welled up in her eyes, glistening. "You have to help me get out," she begged. "Find me a lawyer. Someone excellent. The best money can buy. I'll pay you back, every cent. I swear it." Elliot exhaled slowly and leaned back in his chair. "Is that right?" he said, voice low. Valerie nodded frantically. "I'm pregnant," she whispered. "Your child. Ours." He regarded her for a long moment, unblinking. Then a slow, cutting smile curved his lips. "Valerie," he said, giving a small shake of his head. "Maybe my hearing's not as sharp as it once was, but my memory's perfectly fine." The confidence in her face cracked, fear beginning to creep in. "Elliot, what are you talking about?" He leaned closer, his voice dropping to something dark and cold. "Don't you remember? I was away for 2 weeks. Work trip. That was exactly when you claimed you got pregnant. And after I got back..." He let the silence hang, heavy and brutal. "We didn't even touch. Not once." "You didn't want me," he said flatly. "You were too busy sleeping with some boy." Valerie gasped, her breath catching as she struggled to find the right words. "No, Elliot. Please, you have to hear me out. I love you. I know I messed up, but I need you. Please, don't leave me here." He stared at her, his expression like stone. Her voice cracked into a sob. "You're my husband," she choked out. Elliot released a long, weary breath, as if shedding the final weight of her. Then, with quiet resolve, he stood, smoothing out his jacket. "You stopped being my wife the moment you picked him," he said. Desperation surged in Valerie as she slammed her palms against the glass barrier. "Elliot! Elliot! Don't you walk out on me!" But he was already gone, and this time he wasn't coming back. This story has come to an end. What's your opinion? Share it in the comments, my friend. And if you like this story, check out other exciting videos on my channel. I'll say goodbye until the next video. See you.